I'm Vali Nasser, the Dean of Johns Hopkins University's School of Advanced International Studies, and it's my pleasure to welcome everybody to this event today. We meet just a few days shy of the 100-day mark for President Donald J. Trump's administration. The administration's agenda has been dominated for much of this time with domestic policy priorities such as healthcare, immigration, and job creation. But in the realm of foreign policy, there has been a lot happening as well, and there Asia looms large. Every U.S. administration since the 1970s has strongly emphasized the critical role of this region in American foreign policy. And since then, the overall importance of Asia on the global stage has only intensified. Already, the Trump administration has dealt with hot-button issues involving Asia, the protectionist trade policies to activities in the South China Sea, and now the Korean Peninsula. Yet clearly, the administration sees benefit in engaging Asia early on. President Trump hosted summits with Prime Minister Abe of Japan and President Xi Jinping of China. Vice President Mike Pence's Asia trip and a visit by Secretary of Defense James Mattis to Japan and South Korea also have signaled American intentions to diplomatically engage the region at the highest levels. Today, we offer a 100-day retrospective that aims to assess how the new American government has defined its foreign policy agenda in Asia and with what degree of success it has begun to implement it. This is the first major event hosted by SAIS Asia Programs, and we are proud to co-sponsor it with Asia Society. And a special thanks to Wendy Cutler, the Vice President of Asia Society Policy Institute, for making this event possible. Thank you, Wendy. I would also like to thank the event's co-sponsors, the Johns Hopkins SAIS Reischauer Center for East Asia Studies and the U.S. Korea Institute for their generous support of this program. And now it's my great privilege to introduce Senator Cory Gardner. Senator Gardner is a fifth-generation Coloradan who was born and raised in Yuma, a small town in the eastern plains of Colorado, where his family owned a farm implementing dealership for over a century. He graduated summa cum laude from Colorado State University and received his law degree from the University of Colorado, Boulder. And after working at his family business and the National Corn Growers Association, he took a position as a legislative assistant to Senator Wayne Allard. He began serving in the Colorado House of Representatives in 2005, where he spent time as the minority whip and became known for his expertise in natural resources and agriculture policy. He was elected to the House of Representatives in 2010, and Senator Gardner served in the House Energy and Commerce Committee and led a number of energy efficiency initiatives and founded a bipartisan energy efficiency caucus. He was elected to the Senate in 2015, where he pursues common sense energy policy as a member of the Senate Energy and Natural Resource Committee and chairman of the Energy Subcommittee. In addition, Senator Gardner serves on the Foreign Relations Committee, the Commerce, Science, and Transportation Committee, and the Budget Committee. And he also serves as chairman of Foreign Relations Subcommittee on East Asia, the Pacific, and international cybersecurity policy. In this role, he has led the effort to impose broad new sanctions against North Korea. Senator Gardner, it is my honor to host you at Johns Hopkins SAIS. We look forward to your perspective on U.S.-Asia relations on the Trump administration and also hearing lessons learned from your illustrious career. Thank you and welcome to SAIS. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much, Dr. Nasser. Thank you to all of you for the opportunity to be here today. I am from a little tiny town in the eastern plains of Colorado, and most people in Colorado don't even really know where my hometown is. I have to explain to them it's the place that goes by on the bottom of the television screen, hailstorm coming, take cover. That usually narrows it down a little bit, but it was a unique experience in agricultural policy selling farm equipment. When I first ran for that state legislature in Colorado, I remember going around eastern Colorado, introducing myself to people at the farm equipment dealership saying, "Hi, I'm Cory Gardner. I've met most of you at the farm dealership. I've sold half of you the wrong parts." Everybody started to shake their head, "Yes, you have." It made me feel really bad. So but thank you very much for the kind introduction. And thank you very much to the Asia Society Policy Institute, SAIS, as well, for hosting me here today. And thank you, Dr. Nasser, for the kind introduction. The opportunity to address this illustrious organization comes at an opportune time as President Trump approaches his 100 days, his first 100 days in office, and Vice President Pence has just completed what many observers would say are already calling it a very successful Asia Reassurance tour to Japan, South Korea, Australia, and Indonesia. And I think the word reassurance is particularly a sweet note, and I'll talk a little bit about that more, but in a sense, to put it this way, the administration's reassurance or reaffirmation of unequivocal U.S. commitment to some of our strongest allies in this region. Now, that is the most welcome news of this visit, as well as the announcement that President Trump will attend both the U.S.-ASEAN Summit and the East Asia Summit in the Philippines and APEC Summit in Vietnam. As Woody Allen once said, 90% of life is showing up. And that certainly is the case in the Asia-Pacific and the signal our allies were eagerly awaiting. Today, I will address what I believe should be the Trump administration's most urgent priorities in Asia, and to also outline legislative initiatives that I am leading and working with this administration over the past 100 days, so that over the next several months in Congress, we can continue to strengthen our policies in this critical region that will benefit U.S. national and economic security. And I believe the most urgent challenge for U.S. policy in the region has defined much of the last several months in the region, of course, is the coming nuclear crisis on the Korean Peninsula. Last year alone, North Korea conducted 2 nuclear tests and a staggering 24 ballistic missile launches. All indications from our intelligence community is that Pyongyang is ready to test again one day, any day. Kim Jong-un is committed to developing his nuclear and missile program with one goal in mind: to have a reliable capability to deliver a nuclear warhead to Seoul, Tokyo, and to the continental United States. It is his lone path to regime stability in his mind. President Trump has said that the United States will not allow that to happen, and I am encouraged by the president's resolve over the past 100 days. I believe the U.S. policy toward North Korea should be straightforward. The United States will deploy every and all economic, diplomatic, and if necessary, military tool at our disposal to deter Pyongyang and to protect our allies. As Vice President Pence stated last week during his visit to South Korea, since 1992, the United States and our allies have stood together for a denuclearized Korean peninsula. We hope to achieve this objective through peaceable means, but all options are on the table. However, the road to stopping Pyongyang undoubtedly lies through Beijing. China is the only country that holds both the diplomatic and economic leverage necessary to put the pressure, the maximum pressure, on the North Korean regime. Beijing's reluctance to do so, however, is the reason the regime acts so boldly and with relatively few consequences. China must now move beyond mere articulation of concern and lay out a transparent path of focused pressure to denuclearize North Korea. The administration is right to pursue a policy of its own maximum pressure toward North Korea, and we have a robust toolbox to ramp up the sanctions track. Last Congress, I led the North Korea Policy and Sanctions Enhancement Act, which passed the Senate by a vote of 96-0. This legislation was the first standalone legislation in Congress regarding North Korea to impose mandatory sanctions on the regime's proliferation activities, its human rights violations, and its malicious cyber behavior. The administration must fully enforce this legislation, including imposing secondary sanctions on any Chinese entities that are aiding Pyongyang. In addition, we must pressure China to faithfully implement all UN Security Council resolutions with regard to North Korea, particularly Resolutions 2270 and 2321 negotiated last year, which require China to drastically reduce coal imports from North Korea. China's record in this regard has been lackluster, and they must prove their commitment through their action. China should also stop being complicit in the labor abuses of Pyongyang and shut off avenues of North Korean cyber attacks. Last month, China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi called on the United States and South Korea to halt their annual joint military exercises in exchange for North Korea suspending its missile and nuclear activities, a deal that the Trump administration rightly rejected. We must let Beijing know that the United States will not negotiate with Pyongyang at the expense of our security of our allies. Moreover, before any talks, we must demand that Pyongyang first meet the denuclearization commitments that it had already agreed to and subsequently chose to discard. President Trump should unequivocally condemn the economic pressure exerted by Beijing with Seoul over the deployment of the Terminal High Altitude Area Defense, or THAAD, on South Korean territory. THAAD is a defensive system, and it in no way threatens China, and Beijing knows this. Most importantly, President Trump should continue to indicate to President Xi that a denuclearized Korean peninsula is in both nations' fundamental long-term interests. But to achieve this goal, Beijing must be made to choose whether it wants to work with the United States as a responsible leader to stop the madman in Pyongyang, or bear and acknowledge the consequences of keeping him in power. Another looming crisis in the region is the escalation of tensions in the East and South China Seas. China's recent destabilizing actions in the East China Sea and South China Sea are contrary to international law, pose an increased risk of future conflict, and necessitate a strong U.S. and regional response. Their actions seem at odds with their words. China has declared an illegitimate air defense identification zone in the East China Sea and has dramatically expanded its land reclamation activities in the South China Sea and its clear militarization. Since 2013, according to the Department of Defense, China has reclaimed over 3,200 acres of artificial features in the South China Sea. On July 12, 2016, an international tribunal in The Hague ruled that China violated the sovereignty of the Philippines with regard to maritime disputes between the two nations. China has also built facilities with potential military uses on these artificial islands. We've seen the pictures, including 3 airstrips and hangars that could shelter fighter jets, harbors, anti-aircraft batteries, radars, as well as structures that could house surface-to-air missiles. Last month, the Center for Strategic and International Studies Asia Maritime Transparency Initiative reported, and I quote, "Major construction of military and dual-use infrastructure on the Big Three, Subi, Mischief, and Fiery Cross Reefs is wrapping up, with the naval, air, radar, and defense facilities largely complete. Beijing can now deploy military assets, including combat aircraft and mobile missile launchers, to the Spratly Islands at any time." The United States must have consistent and assertive diplomatic engagement with China to reinforce that these rogue activities fall outside of accepted international norms. More is expected of a great nation. The U.S. defense posture in this region should remain exactly what Secretary of Defense Ashton Carter said at the Shangri-La Dialogue in Singapore on May 30th, 2015. The United States will fly, sail, and operate wherever international law allows, as U.S. forces do all over the world. America, alongside its allies and partners in the regional architecture, will not be deterred from exercising these rights, the rights of all nations. A consistent, deliberate, and assertive policy to do just that is imperative. Last May, while I attended the Shangri-La Dialogue, I heard a tremendous amount of concern from the region's top leaders regarding U.S. presence in the Asia-Pacific region and our commitment to remaining engaged in this critical part of the world. The Trump administration is inheriting an Asia rebalance policy from the previous administration, which was right in rhetoric, but ultimately came up short on meaningful actions. The Asia pivot was a good turn of phrase, but it never resulted in an actual turn to Asia. The new administration and the new Congress ushers a new era of opportunities with regard to U.S. policy toward the Asia Pacific. But despite the political changes in Washington, the U.S. policy imperatives will remain the same. The Asia Pacific region has been and will be critical to U.S. economic and national security interests for generations to come. By 2050, you're going to talk about it throughout today, experts estimate that Asia will account for over half of the global population and over half of the world's gross domestic product. We cannot ignore the fundamental fact that this region is crucial and critical for a U.S. economy, its growth, and to create U.S. jobs through export opportunities. Last month, I held a hearing in the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, Subcommittee on East Asia and Pacific. And of course, the full committee, as Dr. Nasser outlined, is the East Asia Pacific and International. It would never fit on a bumper sticker. It may fit on the whole bumper, but not quite a bumper sticker. But held the hearing, which I chaired, and we had Randy Forbes, a former member of Congress from Virginia and chair of the House Armed Services Subcommittee on Sea Power and Projection Forces, testify before the committee, in which he said this: in the coming decades, this region, where the largest armies in the world will camp, this is the region where the most powerful navies in the world will gather. This is the region where over 1/2 of the world's commerce will take place, and 2/3 will travel. This is the region where a maritime superhighway linking the Indian subcontinent, Southeast Asia, Australia, Northeast Asia, and the United States begins. This is the region where two superpowers will compete to determine which world order will prevail. This is the region where the seeds of conflict that could most engulf the world will probably be planted. This is why I'm pursuing legislation that I call the Asia Reassurance Initiative Act, a new approach, or ARIA, a new approach that will build on American interests, first by reassuring our allies, deterring our adversaries, and securing U.S. leadership in the region for future generations. ARIA will pursue three broad goals. First, it will strengthen U.S. security commitments to our allies and build partner capacity in the Asia-Pacific to deter aggression, project power, and combat terrorism. To do so, the ARIA will authorize funds to bolster U.S. military presence in the region, grow partner nation maritime capabilities to deter aggression in their territorial waters, and to build new counterterrorism partnership programs in Southeast Asia to combat the growing presence of ISIS and other terrorist organizations. ARIA will also enshrine a policy of regularly enforcing U.S. freedom of navigation and overflight rights in the East and South China Seas. We will reaffirm our long-standing treaty alliances with Australia, South Korea, Japan, and call for building new regional security partnerships. We will unequivocally back our ally Taiwan, including authorizing new arms sales and provide for enhanced diplomatic contacts with Taipei. Second, ARIA will promote economic engagement and securing U.S. market access in the Asia-Pacific region as essential elements for the future growth of the U.S. economy and success of American businesses. To do so, ARIA will also require that the Trump administration find new and innovative ways to economically engage the region. We will mandate that the United States government enhance our trade facilitation efforts and opportunities for U.S. businesses to find new export markets in the Asia-Pacific. U.S.-made exports to Asia will mean more good-paying American jobs at home, and that's a win-win that we can all support. We also ensure that there is a level playing field for U.S. companies, including cracking down on state-sponsored and state-endorsed theft of U.S. intellectual property in the region. According to a report by the Intellectual Property Commission, this is a report that was chaired by Admiral Dennis Blair, the former U.S. commander of Pacific Command, and John Huntsman, the former ambassador to China. Theft of U.S. intellectual property is estimated at over $300 billion annually, and China accounts for about 50 to 80% of that amount. China must understand that this behavior with regard to the massive and well-documented theft of foreign international property is unacceptable and antithetical to international norms. Third, ARIA will enshrine promotion of democracy, human rights, and transparency as key U.S. policy objectives in the Asia-Pacific region, particularly in Southeast Asia. A pillar of any nation that seeks a prosperous future and a future with a strong relationship with the United States must be individual freedoms. As President Kennedy once stated, the rights of every man are diminished when the rights of one man are threatened. So from Manila to Rangoon, we should advocate for principled policies that emphasize accountability and transparency as indispensable elements of building any security or economic partnerships with the United States. To inform my initiative, I have met with numerous key stakeholders in Congress and spent many weeks and months talking to the administration over the last several months and going forward, also building and holding a series of hearings in my subcommittee, the first of which took place last month. I look forward to working with all of you to advance this initiative, and I certainly welcome your input moving forward. The stakes for the Trump administration and the United States could not be higher in the U.S. Pacific region. The fundamental question is whether it will be the United States or China that will set the standards for the next generation. China's recent destabilizing actions are proving that its rise may be less than peaceful. And it's imperative that the United States show strong leadership to check Beijing's worst impulses. Putting Asia at front and center for U.S. policy is putting America first, because our future national and economic security depends on it. I want to thank Dr. Nasser Saiz for the opportunity to be with you today, and I'm happy to answer questions going forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Gardner. I think we've all been impressed and stirred and enlightened by your remarks. We have time for about 3 questions. Senator Gardner would like to take those questions together. So please, anyone who would like to, please raise your hands. Okay, we first of all, right in the back, in the middle there.
Hi, thank you. Hi, I'm Megan Casella with Politico. I wondered if you could detail at all, you've mentioned you've been talking with the administration about ARIA and presumably other issues as well. If you could detail at all their reaction, particularly in light of the economic engagement, the idea that the U.S. should economically engage China and other Asian nations as well. Thanks.
Okay, thanks very much. Another question right here.
Ben Self from the Maureen and Mike Mansfield Foundation. Very strong remarks about North Korea, which we strongly endorse, but we always worry about leaving some path for them to compromise and work a way out and not just force into confrontation or violence. So what do you see as the right path for them to be able to back away from this decades-long trajectory towards nuclear deterrence and provide maybe even a small carrot to lead them away from that disaster? Thank you.
Thanks very much. And then right here.
Ken Meyerberg, retiree. Who do you suppose ordered the meandering of the USS Carl Vinson, and what have been the repercussions?
Thank you very much, and so I'll address these 3 questions. When it comes to ARIA, I think the reaction has been very positive. We've spent time both at the State Department as well as visiting with the White House itself about ARIA and the 3 sort of pillars of the legislation from a security standpoint, from an economic standpoint, from a strengthening human rights and democracy standpoint. We've met with various think tanks around Washington, Asia policy centers and studies, leaders in Asia, both in terms of economic issues as well as national security experts when it comes to Asia. The economic engagement is a critical part of this. We've also met with economic leaders, industries around the country when it comes to ARIA. And the economic portion of the bill will, of course, be one of the key pillars, one of the key 3 pillars of the legislation. I do believe that trade with Asia is incredibly important, and Vice President Pence was right to discuss that in Asia, talking about ways to build those trade opportunities. And I think that's how we need to move forward as expeditiously as possible, and ARIA will help focus that. What we have to move beyond in Asia is either catchphrases that sound good but in reality don't result in anything, and we have to move beyond 4- and 8-year thought processes as we look at Asia and move to a 40-year strategy. That's something that Secretary Tillerson has talked about. That's something that Asia Initiative is trying to embrace, a long-term view of how we build that capacity, that partnership, opportunities, and security in a nuts-to-bolts, soup-to-nuts kind of approach in Asia from the north to the south in a comprehensive manner. When it comes to North Korea, look, there was an article, I think, in the news yesterday by David Cohen, who was Undersecretary over at Treasury at terrorist finance sanctions issues. And I think he talked about the comparison between Iran and North Korea when it comes to the amount of sanctions that have been put in place on North Korea. And his point was basically that we have not sanctioned out North Korea, not by any means at all. And so when we look to North Korea, I think there's a couple things that we have to do that we haven't even scratched the surface on, and that is making sure that those enablers of the North Korean regime outside of North Korea need to be held accountable. Secondary sanctions have an extremely important role in the ability to bring Kim Jong-un and break him away from his path toward nuclearization. And so that means that we take a look at, under our legislation that we passed last year, the North Korea Sanctions Enhancement Act, those investigations into violations are mandatory. If there is a finding of a violation, the sanction is mandatory unless there is an individualized waiver from the president. But we have to turn toward these secondary sanctions as one of the most important tools in our toolbox that has not yet been exercised. We have to build our relationship strengthen our relationship between Japan and South Korea, build that trilateral alliance. It's one of the most important and effective tools, not only as it deals directly with North Korea, but as we deal with China and how we can use that trilateral alliance in partnership with China, because we all have the same stated objective, and that is peaceful denuclearization. The incentive should be to North Korea, we are not looking for anything other than peaceful denuclearization. And the incentive is to maybe change the paradigm, to change that photograph, that satellite image at night when you look at the Korean Peninsula and you can see the opportunities that South Korea has enjoyed for the past several decades as they have developed and grown in a quality of life standard that is the envy of many areas of the world, that they too in North Korea could participate in such opportunities if they break away from the dictates of the current regime, and at least if he gives up a nuclear program and is welcomed at the world table once again. The third question is the USS Vincent. Look, I wasn't a part of those discussions. I do think that communications are clear, but I mean the bottom line is we have a show of force that is necessary and important, and regardless of the timing, the fact is we have an important show of force with the Vincent and other capabilities and capacities of the United States, and I think that's important to show strength and commitment to South Korea, but also show ability to North Korea. So thanks very much to all of you for the opportunity to be with you today, and I look forward to hearing the results of the next panel of experts. You've got some incredible people. What a great fortune it is to have them here. So thank you.
So please join me in thanking the Senator. Thank you very much.